There we go.
Okay, so we're recording this so that everyone, some of this stuff is a little dense. You can go back and review it. It will be posted at crpa.org/webinars. That'll be mentioned a little later. My name is Chuck Michel. I'm the senior partner at Michel & Associates. With me today is Matt Cabero, who is the Second Amendment and Civil Litigation Counsel with us. Also, I think listening in is Joe Silvoso, our Regulatory Compliance Counsel and Criminal Defense Attorney. I'm hoping that we will be able to, if you see on your screen, there is a participant feedback column where you guys can actually ask questions, and Joe can try and answer some of those if they don't get too deep into the weeds. And please don't put anything on there about, I committed this crime and I don't want to get caught. There's no attorney-client privilege on this call, so let's not have any confessions that we need to try and deal with. But any generic questions about what the law requires or what you can do to not come under the law, you can try posting those there, and Joe should be able to, I hope, answer some of those questions in real time as we go through, as Matt and I give the webinar. So first off, today we're going to have a short discussion of the assault weapon law restriction, and we have much more detail about what the assault weapon laws do, the new so-called assault weapon laws will do, on the CRPA website right now, so you can go see those webinars. I'm sorry that this material is just so dense that it took us 4 or 5 webinars to cover it all. And we broke down the compliant webinar from the featureless webinar, because trying to put those two things together was just a huge presentation. So today we're going to cover what has become known as California compliant bills. On Thursday, we'll have another webinar on featureless bills. So this is going to be dealing with rimfire conversions, fixed magazine aftermarket devices, stuff that will make your firearm so it doesn't actually come under the new assault weapon statute or the accompanying regs. Just to do our lawyer weasel word stuff, you know, there's no attorney-client privilege created here. We're not your lawyers by virtue of giving you this webinar. The DOJ is an unpredictable entity, and so are some DAs. There's a lot of confusion about what laws require and what the laws require and what they don't require. There has been since 1989, when this stupid, and I don't think it's an overstatement to call it that, assault weapon law was first passed in its first iteration. So it's tough to give any guarantees about anything that police or prosecutors or the DOJ may do, given how politicized this subject matter is and this law is. Today's presentation is being put on by the NRA and it's being put on by my law firm, Michel & Associates, but it's sponsored by and produced by the NRA and the CRPA. I hope that everybody on this call is a member of both. If you can only be a member of one, join NRA. We need them more than any other time. They're very active in California, despite what some of the rumors going around may say. If you want to know what we're doing, this month's issue of the CRPA Firing Line magazine has a detailed firearms litigation and legislative affairs report in it, and it's also the legal affairs report is posted on the CRPA's website. So please join. Both CRPA and NRA are working together to try and protect our rights out here, doing all kinds of different things aside from just being up in Sacramento and lobbying. There are, I like to call it, everybody called the laws that passed with Prop 63 and all the other gun laws that Kevin DeLeon and Gavin Newsom had a contest to see who could be the king of gun control and pass more stupid laws. Well, together the two of them came up with what everybody's calling Gunmageddon, and in response to Gunmageddon, CRPA and NRA have launched Suapalooza. So we have lawsuits against all of the, essentially all of the bills that either passed by the legislature or passed by Prop 63. There's also some information on the CRPA website about what Prop 63 how we oppose that because of campaign finance laws. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on that right now. But the point is, both CRPA and NRA are very much engaged. If you are willing to consider being a plaintiff for us in some of the lawsuits that we still have to file, please send us an email at potentialplaintiffs@michellelawyers.com. We still need a few for our ammo challenge. And again, I won't go into all the lawsuits that we've filed because I don't want to take up the time on this webinar, but there's a lot of them. There's some places where you can get some more information about those. Again, this will be posted on the CRPA website. You'll be able to play that back and pause so you can study any one of these slides. I'll also note, and I have a slide about it at the end, that the book that Joe Silvoso and I write called California Gun Laws, A Guide to State and Local, Federal and State Firearm Regulations. We finally got the 5th edition out from the printer today. We have to wait to see at the end of September what Governor Brown signs or vetoes before we can finalize that book, and then there's just the unavoidable process of getting it to the printer and having it printed and getting it shipped and all the other things that need to be done to get a book out. Finally, we got it in, and so you can get that. It'll be on Amazon by tomorrow, and if you order it through Amazon Smile, you can pick Amazon's pocket a little bit. I know they're not exactly pro-gun. That's an understatement. But some people just can't kick that habit. So if you go through Amazon Smile and pick the CRPA Foundation as your charity, some of the money that Amazon would otherwise get as a profit goes to the RKBA cause. So with that, I think that gets us into the actual meat of the presentation here, and I will turn it over to Matt and let him take it from here.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Just want to double check before I keep going. Can everyone hear me okay in the presentation here? I noticed some people are having audio problems. Okay, it looks like people can, so that's good.
Looks like some people are having video problems too. You are supposed to be seeing the PowerPoint slides on your screen and hearing us. I will check and see. I believe that if some people have, depending on your browser, may have a problem with the audio, but I think there's a call-in line. Actually, let me jump back here for a second. Bear with me, folks who aren't having technical difficulties. If you can't get your audio working, there's the call-in line, 303-248-0285. Of course, folks with our audio not working can't hear that, but you can listen to the webinar over the phone as well as online. So I don't know what else to do other than make people aware of that as best I can. In fact, Joe, maybe you can, I'll type in when Matt gets going here, I'll type in that number again. All right?
Okay, so
Matt, back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to take it from here. So before we get started into the actual sort of nitty-gritty of the presentation, I'm just going to briefly go over some of the changes that were made as a result of the changes to California's assault weapons laws and how it affected this presentation specifically. So as most of you are already well aware, in 2016 the legislature enacted both Senate Bill 880 and Assembly Bill 1135, which redefined California's definition of an assault weapon. As you can see there, the definition was changed with regards to certain rifles and pistols only. Specifically, California's previous definition prior to 2017 was any semi-automatic centerfire rifle that had the capacity to accept a detachable magazine and was equipped with any one of the following features listed there, as well as semi-automatic pistols that also had the capacity to accept a detachable magazine with any one of those features listed there. The law changed it, so instead of analyzing the firearm as it relates to the capacity to accept a detachable magazine, the question now is, does it not have a fixed magazine, and that's one of the following features. So, with that said, there are other definitions under California's assault weapons law as they apply to certain firearms that specifically weren't changed, and these are namely those particular firearms. There are firearms that are still prohibited by make and model, regardless of the features or characteristics that it has. Certain semi-automatic centerfire rifles with a fixed magazine that can accept more than 10 rounds, semi-automatic centerfire rifles with an overall length of less than 30 inches, semi-automatic pistols with the capacity to accept more than 10 rounds, semi-automatic shotguns with certain features that are listed there, and also semi-automatic shotguns with the ability to accept a detachable magazine. That one is highlighted in red because DOJ, through its regulatory actions, have labeled those particular shotguns as assault weapons now if they don't have a fixed magazine, and as a result are requiring them to be registered just as certain rifles and pistols are now required to be registered. Lastly, any shotgun with a revolving cylinder under California law is also considered an assault weapon. So regardless of what we're talking about here, it's important to keep these in mind because regardless of the features or characteristics of your particular firearm, if it meets any one of these definitions, it is still considered an assault weapon under California law regardless. So just bear that in mind. To help people sort of understand whether or not their firearms actually are considered assault weapons under the new law, CRPA and NRA put together this flowchart which you can reference, which is available both on NRA and CRPA's website. This will help you if you're unclear with regards to whether or not your particular firearm is considered an assault weapon based off of its characteristics and features under California law. This will tell you whether or not you are legally allowed to register it, or if for whatever reason it is an illegal assault weapon, in which case you should speak to an attorney immediately about that, or whether or not it's actually not considered an assault weapon and as a result is not affected by the law. So if you haven't seen that already, that's available, like I said, on NRA and CRPA's website. Moving on, so let's say that you now have a firearm that is considered an assault weapon. There are some requirements if you intended to register that firearm, as you are able to do so now. Namely that the most important aspect there is that you lawfully possess the firearm prior to January 1st, 2017. Had to be in a completed configuration that is now considered an assault weapon. So, for example, if you purchased a frame or receiver after January 1st, 2017, and then you subsequently built it up with the intention of registering it as an assault weapon, that is an illegal assault weapon that you've now created after January 1st, 2017 that you cannot register as an assault weapon. So just keep in mind that if your intent is to register a firearm, it had to have been possessed in a fully functioning configuration prior to January 1st of 2017. Outside of registration, you do have other options, and we totally understand that there are some people out there that simply will not wish to comply with California law. We get it. You know, I'm a gun owner myself, as several of us here are in the office, and so the point of this webinar is to make sure that you have the information that you need if you choose to comply with the laws with regards to what those requirements are. We're not suggesting that any one particular option that's available to you is appropriate for your particular circumstances. We just want to make this information available as best as possible. So with regards to that, alternatives to registering a firearm, generally speaking, under the law, you are allowed to modify your firearm, you can disassemble it, you can sell or surrender it, or you can remove it from the state. All of these options are available to you if you decide for whatever reason that you do not want to register the firearm. Today, we're going to be talking about a particular type of modification in which you can build what's commonly referred to as a California compliant build. What this means is that you are removing one of the three prerequisite characteristics of the firearm that labels it an assault weapon under California law. With regards to rifles, this means that the firearm has to be either non-semi-automatic, fires rimfire cartridges only, or is equipped with a fixed magazine. For pistols, the only difference is essentially that it doesn't matter with regards to a pistol whether or not it fires rimfire or centerfire cartridges. As a result, you have to ensure that the pistol is either non-semi-automatic or equipped with a fixed magazine. On Thursday, we're going to be talking more about featureless builds. This is essentially ensuring that the particular firearm in question is not equipped with any one of those particular features that are listed there. Like I said, we'll be talking about that more in detail on Thursday. So this webinar, we're specifically focusing on the California compliant builds. Before we go any further, I just want to make sure that everyone understands this. Obviously, we're trying to provide this information for this webinar for information purposes only. It's important to note that there are many, many different products that are available out there on the market today that are designed or marketed to make a California firearm compliant with regards to the assault weapon laws. We're not, to the extent that any product is discussed here, we're not providing any endorsements. They're not being listed in any particular order. And of course, we do our best to render an opinion that is a reasonable conclusion regarding the particular product. But nevertheless, nothing would prevent a prosecutor or local law enforcement officer from arriving at a different conclusion. So a lot of this stuff is sort of to the best of our ability to determine whether or not that particular product satisfies California's requirements. Part of the problem with this is that years ago, the California Department of Justice used to issue regular opinions regarding particular products as far as California's firearm laws are concerned. They no longer do that for various reasons, one of them being, for example, that they don't want to be held to an opinion that they previously issued if they, for whatever reason, wanted to change their minds on the subject. So today, these opinions generally aren't issued anymore, with the exception if they're requested by particular public officials or government agencies. So, moving on to the actual specifics regarding California compliant firearms, the first thing that I'd like to talk about is the semi-automatic requirement. As I mentioned previously, and as is shown in California's assault weapon laws, one of the primary requirements for any particular firearm that's considered an assault weapon is that it be semi-automatic. The California Department of Justice has enacted regulations that help sort of define what that term semi-automatic means. As stated here in the regulations that were recently enacted, a firearm is considered semi-automatic if it is functionally able to fire a single cartridge, eject the empty case, and reload the chamber each time the trigger is pulled. There are certain necessary mechanical parts that allow a firearm to function in a semi-automatic nature that must be present in order for the firearm to be considered semi-automatic. So what that means is that if it's lacking any one of those particular parts, the firearm itself is not considered semi-automatic for the purposes of California's assault weapon laws. So just to give you an idea, these are a couple different types of firearm actions that are currently available on the market today. Obviously, the one that we're focusing on is the semi-automatic action. If you were to convert your firearm, for example, an AR-15 firearm, to be any other type of action other than semi-automatic, for example, I'm aware that there are upper receivers for AR-15 style firearms that function as a bolt action. Other types of receivers that have a different type of action that aren't semi-automatic for whatever reason. If that's the case, if the firearm is equipped with any one of those types of actions, it is not considered semi-automatic for the purposes of California's assault weapon laws, and as a result is not considered an assault weapon that has to be registered. So if you wanted to convert your firearm to have a different type of action other than a semi-automatic action, that is one option that is available to you. Moving on, the Centerfire requirement. This requirement, as I mentioned, only applies to rifles. When we're talking about Centerfire, we're talking about a cartridge that has its primer located in the center of the base. And basically, for those that aren't familiar with the term, a cartridge is defined as a complete round of ammunition that consists of a primer, case, propellant, and one or more projectiles. Just to give you the typical cartridge components here, this is a typical ammunition cartridge that consists of those four components, which I talked about there. What we're concerned about here with regards to Centerfire is the primer itself. The difference with regards to rimfire and Centerfire, the rimfire cartridge is the priming compound, which contains the impact-sensitive chemical, which when struck by the gun's firing pin, ignites the powder in the cartridge, is located inside the rim of the case head. On Centerfire cartridges, there is a primer that is contained in a metal cup in the center of the case head, which you can see there. There's a cutaway view of both a rimfire and a Centerfire cartridge. So, if you convert your rifle that is now considered an assault weapon under California law to fire .22 long rifle rimfire, for example, that particular firearm is no longer considered an assault weapon under California's laws. So there are kits that are available that you can convert, as shown here, that will replace some of the internal mechanisms in the firearm, so it is no longer considered Centerfire, and as a result is no longer considered an assault weapon under California law. Moving on, the fixed magazine requirement. Fixed magazine has been defined by the California legislature as any ammunition feeding device contained in or permanently attached to a firearm in such a manner that the device cannot be removed without disassembly of the firearm action. A couple important notes here that the term ammunition feeding device, as included in this definition, includes belted or linked ammunition, but does not include clips, en banc clips, or stripper clips used to load the magazine. That will become important here in a little bit. Contained in is also another important aspect of this definition, means that the magazine cannot be released while the action is assembled. On AR-15 style firearms, this means while the upper and lower receiver are joined together. So, compare, for example, the term detachable magazine, which is also used in California's assault weapons laws still, and was the previous requirement under California's assault weapon laws regarding certain rifles and pistols. The term has been defined by DOJ as any ammunition feeding device that can be removed readily from the firearm without disassembly of the firearm action or use of a tool. And for the purposes of this definition, still a bullet or ammunition cartridge is considered a tool. The term disassembly of the firearm action, this was a question when the law was first passed, what's specifically required for a particular firearm with regards to the definition of fixed magazine. DOJ defined this as the fire control assembly is detached from the action in such a way that the action has been interrupted and will not function. And as I mentioned, the action is considered to be the working mechanism of a semi-automatic firearm, which the combination of a receiver or frame and breech bolt together with the other parts of the mechanism by which a firearm is loaded, fired, and unloaded. Now, for semi-auto actions, for example, like that on an AR-15 style firearm, DOJ has specifically stated that disassembly of the action would require the rear takedown pin to be removed and the upper receiver lifted upwards and away from the lower receiver using the front pivot pin as the fulcrum before the magazine may be removed. Because of this definition, we now have some sort of clear understanding with regards to what's required for a particular product to be considered a fixed magazine. So these are the products that we're going to be talking about today, which I know some of you are very eager to learn more about, and we'll just get right into it here. The first one, AR Maglock. I have a picture of it here. Essentially replaces the magazine disconnect mechanism on an AR-15 style firearm. Or if you had a bullet button that was previously installed there, you can see I have it circled there in red to give you an idea of what it looks like. So of course the question then becomes, does this particular product satisfy California's requirements? Well, when it's properly installed on an AR-15 style firearm, to remove the magazine requires the rear takedown pin to be removed and the upper receiver lifted upwards. As a result, this device should satisfy DOJ's definition of fixed magazine. So equipping a firearm with this particular device the firearm would then be considered to have a fixed magazine and would no longer be considered an assault weapon under California law. Moving on to the next one, the Patriot Mag Release. This is also sort of very similar in function to the AR Maglock, although it's installed a little bit differently. It replaces the magazine disconnect mechanism on an AR-15 style firearm, and it functions essentially in the same manner in that removal of the magazine requires the takedown pin to be removed and the upper receiver lifted upwards before you can release the magazine, and as a result, this device, like the AR Maglock, should satisfy DOJ's definition. Moving on to some of the other options that are available, the Mean Arms MA Lock. This one works a little bit differently. It still essentially replaces the magazine disconnect mechanism on the firearm. The way this works, however, is that you can see that there's the two parts there right below the package logo there. When you install this, the head of the bolt that's screwed into the magazine disconnect mechanism intentionally shears off, which you can see when it's mounted on the firearm. That leaves a little silver ring there that you can no longer unscrew using a particular tool. As a result, when it's properly installed on the AR-15 style firearm, there are a couple things that you have to do in order to remove the magazine. There is a special tool that comes with this particular device that you have to use in order to remove a polymer magazine, for example, that is inserted from the top of the lower receiver that sort of wedges between the receiver and the magazine to sort of push the magazine out of the way enough that you can then release it. So because it only can be used from the top of the lower receiver, you have to remove the upper receiver from the firearm in such a way that will allow you to insert that tool, and as a result, this device should satisfy DOJ's definition of the term fixed magazine. Moving on to the next one, Franklin Armory's DFM magazine. This one's also a little bit different. Essentially, this, instead of replacing a part on the firearm, actually replaces the magazine itself. The only way that this magazine can be inserted into an AR-15 style firearm is from the top of the receiver because of the two lips that I have that are circled there on the image on the right. That prevents the magazine from being inserted from the bottom of the magazine well. Instead, it has to be inserted from the top. And as a result of that, in order to remove this magazine, you have to remove the upper receiver from the lower receiver. And as a result, this device should satisfy DOJ's definition of the term fixed magazine. And as a result, using this product will satisfy California's requirements to no longer consider the firearm an assault weapon under California law. The last one, the Hogue Freedom Fighter Fixed Magazine Kit. This one's a little bit different than the others. The kit itself there I have an image of on the left-hand side, but essentially the only part of the kit that actually gets installed on the firearm itself is the little pin, which you can see circled there on the lower receiver. The kit is used to install that pin on the receiver itself, so this does require some drilling of the lower receiver itself. But basically how this works is that pin, when it's properly installed on the firearm, prevents the magazine disconnect button that you can use on any typical AR-15 style firearm from actually being able to be depressed. The only way that you can then depress the magazine disconnect mechanism is if the upper receiver is lifted up off of the firearm, just like the other devices. So essentially, removal of the magazine using a Hogue Freedom Fighter kit requires the rear takedown pin to be removed and the upper receiver lifted upwards. As a result, this device should satisfy DOJ's definition of the term fixed magazine. So with that, there are a couple additional considerations regarding fixed magazine kits like the ones we just talked about. Word of caution, whatever product you end up using or that you want to use, you want to, of course, make sure that it's been installed correctly and is functioning properly. Remember that repeated use of the device, for example, could cause it to come loose or not function properly. And of course, disassembly of the firearm and or mechanism and subsequent reassembly without the device installed properly can potentially create an illegal assault weapon under California law. So just be careful with regards to whatever product that you're using that you want to periodically check to make sure that it's functioning properly and doesn't have any issues that could potentially cause you serious consequences later on down the road. There's another practical concern that we wanted to discuss with regards to double feed malfunctions, which is also called a type 3 malfunction. This is caused when two objects, normally two cartridges, try to enter a firearms chamber at the same time. Typically, to clear a malfunction of this type requires removal of the magazine from the firearm. As you can imagine, on firearms equipped with fixed magazines, that's somewhat problematic, especially on AR-15 style firearms that have these sort of fixed magazine modifications. The reason for that is that the bolt carrier group on a double feed malfunction is slightly protruding into the buffer tube, and as a result, that would prevent you from lifting the upper receiver up and away from the lower receiver, which would then allow you to remove the magazine. So because of that, there are some suggested actions that we would suggest you consider if you are going to be using any of these fixed magazine features. The first one, avoid using any permanently altered magazines that do not allow removal of the magazine's floor plate. The reason for that is if you can remove the magazine's floor plate, you could potentially clear the malfunction. And so as a result, if you can use a magazine like that, or if you, for example, if those of you in California obviously have magazines that have been permanently altered from 30-round bodies to only accept 10 rounds, usually those permanent alterations prevent you from removing the floor plate. Just be very careful about using those magazines with these devices. Always, of course, properly maintain your firearm. Regular cleaning and maintenance is important, and ensure that you are using the proper ammunition for your firearm. A couple other considerations with regards to other modifications that sort of relate to these fixed magazine parts. Rear takedown pit replacements, the mean arms, MA loader, and other means to permanently fix the magazine to the firearm. Just a couple of rear takedown pin replacement options. For example, there's the Patriot pin and the extended takedown pin. Both of these will replace the rear takedown pin on a lower receiver of an AR-15 style firearm, which will then assist in removing that rear takedown pin for the purposes of removing the magazine. There are a couple legal considerations, obviously, though. Replacing the stock takedown pin, however, either the Patriot pin, extended takedown pin, or similar device should really have no effect on whether or not a firearm is considered an assault weapon. It's not a prohibited feature. It doesn't necessarily change the fact that you have to remove the rear takedown pin. It just aids in that process, and so as a result, if you wanted to use a particular product like that, there shouldn't be any impact as far as whether or not that firearm is considered an assault weapon under California law. This is another new device that was recently released, the Mean Arms MA loader. Essentially the way that this works is instead of removing the magazine, you can now use this as sort of kind of like a stripper clip to load the magazine that's been inserted into the firearm. Instead of actually connecting to the magazine, though, this connects through the ejection port on AR-15 style firearms, and then you can push the rounds, which are loaded into the MA loader, into the magazine, which is already inserted into the firearm. So, of course, the question then becomes, is this legal under California law? As I mentioned earlier, according to the new regulations, ammunition feeding devices do not include clips, en banc clips, or stripper clips that load cartridges into the magazine. So because of that, this particular device is used to load ammunition. It is not considered a magazine for the purposes of California law, and its use should have no impact on whether or not the firearm is considered an assault weapon. Lastly, a couple other options. You can pin, weld, rivet, or epoxy your magazine to the firearm. By doing so, the magazine should be considered fixed for the purposes of California law. We just, of course, recommend that you use extreme caution when making permanent modifications to the firearm. That is pretty much it as far as what we were wanting to talk about here today. Chuck, did you want to talk a little bit more about the book?
Well, just again, I've already given this a mention, but let folks know that it is available. Goes into this in much more detail and everything else about California's hyper-complicated firearms laws. There's over 100 new pages of new material on this in this particular 5th edition. I never thought this was going to have to be an annual, but I think I'm going to probably have to sell subscriptions or something to it, because it doesn't look like there's ever going to be a year where they're going to slow down and I can just use the same book twice. I do want to compliment Joe Silvoso for the answers that he's providing to a lot of the questions that are scrolling through on the Q&A bracket frame there. And I want to thank everybody for listening and for supporting and believing in the right to keep and bear arms. I hope you all do join, if you haven't already, CRPA and NRA, and support us. The lawsuits that we're filing are, even though we give very significant nonprofit discounts to both NRA and CRPA, they're still expensive to litigate, and the DOJ, Cal DOJ, throws everything they have at those. So any contribution you can make is greatly appreciated. We have, again, all the webinars that we've done in the past, and this one will be up in a day or two, are on the CRPA websites. You can subscribe to CRPA alerts, and I hope everyone does. We need everybody informed. That's the first step to being involved. If you have suggestions for future webinars, let us know. We will have another one on the featureless builds on Thursday at noon, and I hope to see many of you there. We had about 1,000 people on this particular webinar, and based on historical performance of the other webinars we posted, we typically get about 10,000 views on those. So these are very popular, and we're happy to keep doing them. So let us know if you have a topic that you think we ought to cover, and we'll put it together. If you are asking the question, it's likely that a lot of other people are asking it too. We are going to send out some poll questions to everybody. Your responses are, of course, voluntary, but it does help us to try and figure out. We're working very hard to get more gun owners engaged in the fight in California. There's something like 10 million gun owners in this state. If I could get 1 million of them engaged in the political process, we could turn most of this state red. So ponder that. I mean, we are potentially the most powerful voting bloc in the state of California, and if we could just unify. So please take those poll questions and help us figure out how to reach out to more people and get more people engaged. Other than that, I think I want to thank Matt for walking us through this, and we will hopefully see all you folks on Thursday. That should conclude our presentation, and we'll get this up on the CRPA website as quickly as we can. And thank you again.
Yeah, let's.
Signing off.
What I can do is I could stick around for a little bit. If you guys have questions, we can stick around. I'm happy to stick around at least for a little bit. If you want to ask questions in the actual Q&A section, I'll try and answer them here, at least for the next couple minutes while we're still.
Joe, Matt, and I we'll all try and stick around. We're going to end the recording, but we'll stick around and try and answer those questions that come through on that feed. So that's fine. Happy to do that. Okay. Thanks again, everybody.